I would like to start this video just reading some passages from Proverbs about anger. Let's begin in Proverbs 14, verses 16 and 17. A wise man fears the Lord and shuns evil, but a fool is hot-headed and reckless. A quick-tempered man does foolish things, and a crafty man is hated. You know that the book of Proverbs is about wisdom and foolishness. And today we're going to talk about wisdom and foolishness with regard to our anger. Notice what he said, a wise man does what? It shuns evil, but what does a fool do? He's hot-headed and reckless. Verse 29 of chapter 14 says this, a patient man has great understanding, but a quick-tempered man displays folly. The next chapter, chapter 15, verse 18, a hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. Proverbs 27:4 says this, anger is cruel and fury overwhelming, but who can stand before jealousy? And then finally, 30:33 says this, for as the churning the milk produces butter, and the twisting of a nose produces blood, so stirring up anger produces strife. Boy, the book of Proverbs has so many things to say about anger. There's no way we can run through all of them in one video. But I'm going to give you some principles to live by with regard to anger. We need to understand anger. We need to understand why we're angry. And we need to address the issues around anger so we can manage it. It's one of those emotions we have to manage or it will come back and destroy our lives. So let's just start with this. Anger is the result of unmet expectations. Unmet expectations. So in other words, anger says, you owe me. You owe me. I get angry when I have an expectation about our relationship or about something that was supposed to happen, and that expectation did not come true, it was unmet, and that makes me angry. So, for example, I'm in a business with my partner, and I say, okay, I'm going to do A, B, and C by Monday morning, and you do D, E, and F. And he says, okay, I got it. And so we show up Monday morning for our weekly business meeting, and I said, okay, I did A, B, and C, how about you? And he says, well, I got busy, and I didn't quite get D or E or F done. Well, I get angry. Why? Because my expectations aren't met. And so you owe me, and that's what makes me angry, because I had expectations about what something you were going to do and you didn't do it. It happens in marriage and with children and parents all the time. I am in this marriage and I expect my wife to do something. I might communicate it to her, or it might be an unspoken expectation. And then when she doesn't fulfill that expectation, it makes me angry. Watch your fights in your marriage or with your kids or with your friends and see how many fights are a result of you're angry because you felt like they were going to do something they didn't do. You had an expectation they didn't fulfill, and that makes you angry, and that's what anger is. What's interesting is anger is not a sin. The Bible makes it clear it's not a sin. However, there is something called righteous anger and unrighteous anger. We can be angry at the injustices in the world. We have expectations for how the world should operate, and then when it doesn't operate that way, it makes us angry. And by the way, Jesus got angry over the world and some expectations that weren't fulfilled. And I think God gets angry at times when the world is in a place where it's unfulfilling expectations for the way He designed it to be. And the things that make God angry should also be the things that make us angry. When we think about God, we think about God as love, right? And He is. God is love. That is who He is. But you know what anger is? Anger is an expression of love. Because see, if you don't care, you don't get angry. You only get angry about things you care about. And you care about them, why? Because you love them. Anger and love aren't opposites. They're bedfellows. Love and apathy are the opposites. And so anger is a part of love. And when you think about it, in the Old Testament, God had this covenant relationship with the children of Israel, and He would get very angry with them, and He would say, I am angry and I'm a jealous God And here's why. You know what he would call them? Because you are adulterers. He says, you've had an affair on me. You've committed adultery on me. I'm your God, and you went and had an affair with other gods. And because I love you and because I care about you, that makes me angry. Well, it's the same way with us. If that's God's heart, wouldn't that be our heart too? Let me ask you a question. Has anybody ever cheated on you? You ever been in love with someone and they had an affair on you, cheated on you? Does that make you a little angry? Well, why? Because you are in relationship with them and they're supposed to be loyal to you and they broke your trust. That makes you angry. God gets angry out of His love, and there's this righteous anger that we can get that is out of our love. We want the world to be like God created it to be, and there's all these injustices, and these injustices can make us angry because we had an expectation for how the world should be, and then it's not that way, and that should make us angry. You say, give me some examples, okay? Human trafficking. Human trafficking is terrible, and it should make us angry that happens in the world. In fact, it should make us angry enough that we do something about it. See, our anger should not turn into destruction, but should actually be used to get us to a place where we want to do something about societal change. That's what righteous anger does. Many years ago, there were two moms who lost children to drunk drivers, and they started something called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And they caused huge societal change and even legal change around the whole idea of drunk driving because their anger spurred them on to do something that benefited society. So those are the kind of things that we need to think about. There are things that I should get angry about. I should be angry at sin. God's angry at sin. I should be angry at injustice. God's angry at injustice. I should be angry when there is sex trafficking, when rape occurs, sexual immorality occurs. Those kinds of things are the kinds of things that are at the heart of God, and they should be at my heart too. And so we should get angry over those things. But anger, it's not a sin, it's an emotion. But how we handle our anger is the difference between societal change for the good and absolute destruction. We're watching in our society right now people who are angry, but instead of using it as a motivation to make positive societal change, what are they doing? They're hurting society. They're destroying society. They're hurting other people. And so anger is a motivator. But if it doesn't motivate us to do good, we can actually use that anger to destroy the people around us. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of our time together, because reality is most of our anger is not justified. It's selfish anger because I had an unfulfilled expectation. I didn't get my way. I'm selfish in that, and that makes me mad. And so let's talk a little bit about how should we handle our anger. And there are really three possible ways of handling anger. You may have done all three, you may have done none of the three, but I think these are the three primary ways we handle anger. And the first one is we repress it. We repress it. There's a very interesting verse of Scripture in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26. And anytime I talk about anger, this is the verse that I bring up. It says, in your anger, do not sin. See, that tells you right there what anger is not a sin, but what? But it can lead to sin so quickly depending on how we decide to handle our anger. Then it says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, what? There's a time limit. You need to handle your anger in a timely fashion. And then third, do not give the devil a foothold or a stronghold. That is a really interesting comment there about do not give the devil a foothold or a stronghold. Anger is an emotion, it's not a sin. But Satan is right there because there is a way that he can use anger to really set up a stronghold in our lives. So let me just take a minute to explain this to you before we go on and talk about repressed anger. Back in World War II, Germany had taken over Europe for the most part and had a foothold, had dominated Europe. And so we decided to enter the war, and we had to go onto the land of Europe, and we had to set up what we called a stronghold where we could safely get our ammunition, our men, our artillery onto the land so that we could begin to engage the enemy and take back the land from the Germans. And so we chose Normandy on D-Day as the place where we were going to build that stronghold. And so we were all in. It was Katie bar the door. We've got to do whatever it takes to build that stronghold. And so you know how many thousands and thousands of men died that day. But we pushed and we pushed and we pushed. And finally we took a little bit of beachfront right there at Normandy so we could set up a stronghold, a base of operations by which we could get our artillery and our men safely on shore so we could engage the enemy and fight the war. And ultimately, because D-Day succeeded and we set up the stronghold, we won the war. Okay, well, that is the same exact word here for foothold or stronghold by Satan. Here's what happens. Satan, he gets a map of my brain because, spiritual warfare we know is fought in the mind, right? So Satan lays out a map of my brain and he says, okay, I know Brad. I've been watching him since he was a baby and I know his weaknesses and I know his strengths. I know where it's hard to attack him. I know where it's easy to attack him. So here's what I'm going to do. I've got to find his weakness. And I'm just going to keep poking till I find that weakness. And when I find that weakness, I'm going to go all on into that weakness so I can set up a little stronghold in his mind. And through that stronghold, then I can attack other areas of his mind. Now, we're not talking about salvation here. We're saved, but there's still a battle going on for our mind, for our will. And that battle, Satan can set up strongholds. One of the places he sets up strongholds, as much as anything else, is through anger. Because in anger, there's this weakness in us that Satan can come in, use that anger to build a stronghold, tell us lies that we believe. That's what a stronghold is. He tells us a lie and we believe it. And in our anger, we don't think straight and we believe these lies by the enemy. And then he comes in, he's able to set up a stronghold and then begin to attack us in a whole lot of other areas in our lives. So why is it so important to address anger the correct way? Because if we don't, we are an open target for Satan to attack our mind and build a stronghold in our mind. And so we have to address anger the way it was intended to be addressed. So the first way not to handle anger, is repress. We cannot repress it. However, I don't know that it was ever taught in our pulpits that we are to repress anger, but it's almost like there is in the DNA of churches this whole idea of good little Christians don't get angry. And so when we feel anger, we almost feel like, well, I'm a good Christian, so I can't get angry. So you know what we do with that anger? We repress it. We stuff it. And so then we get angry again and go, oh boy, there I am being not a very good Christian again. I got angry again. So I got to repress it. And we stuff it. And we stuff it. And we stuff it. And we stuff it. And here's the problem with repression. When you repress anger long enough, you know what it'll do? It will explode. It's like boiling water on the stove. If you have that covered for too long, it's going to boil over. And that's what happens. And now listen, nobody should enjoy conflict, but most of us are so afraid of conflict that we become conflict avoidant. We'll do anything to not deal with conflict, so we repress. And this happens in marriages all the time. I see it happen. And so Allison will do something that I don't like, but you know what? I really don't want to deal with it tonight because she's in a good mood and I don't want to ruin the evening and the ambiance, so I just stuff it. And then next week she does something and you know what, I'm kind of frustrated, but I really don't want to deal with it because the Masters is on this weekend and you know what, I really would rather watch the golf tournament, so I stuff it. And then next week she does something else and you know what, I'm going to stuff it because we're going to go away for the weekend and I don't want to ruin that, so I stuff it. And then 3 or 4 months down the line, I have this huge explosion over one little thing she did that she's going, what in the world was that? Why are you angry about that? But it's not that. That's the straw that broke the camel's back. I'm angry about the other 9 things I stuffed. And through repressing that, then I have this explosion. So now I'm calling her names, I'm raising my voice, I'm yelling at her, and the whole thing goes south because I repressed that anger. It would be so much healthier if I would have just dealt with those one at a time. And you say, yeah, but then you're fighting all the time, but you don't have to fight in it. You can address the anger without fighting, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this repression, it just grows and then it just blows up. Here's the second problem with repression. The Ephesian writer talks about it, Paul does, again in 4 through the end of 4 in the beginning of chapter 5, and that is anger, unresolved anger leads to resentment, which is kind of free-floating anger, and then resentment leads to bitterness, which is out-and-out hatred at everything. And so what happens is I have this anger, and it's directed toward a person, but if I repress and repress and repress, suddenly I'm not mad at Allison anymore for one thing. My heart is morphed, and now I'm resentful toward Allison just in general. And then if I still don't deal with it and I still repress and repress and repress, then I get bitter, not against Allison, she's a representative, and so now I'm bitter against all women. You'll find this after divorce a lot. You know, the women will hate all men and the men will hate all women. Why? Because there's so much pain in there, and they're not addressing that pain, and so they become bitter against the opposite sex, and for a season until they heal, they hate members of the opposite sex. And so you kind of see that. The unresolved anger turns into resentment, which is free-floating. Everybody owes me. Allison doesn't owe me now. Everybody owes me. Nobody's meeting my expectations, toward bitterness. And that's, you've met bitter people before. They've never dealt with their issues. And because they've never dealt with their issues, they just become bitter toward life. And you meet those as they get older. If you have met those bitter old men and bitter old women where they just hate everything, well, it's because they've never dealt with their anger in their life. And here's what's interesting. When that happens, that's where hatred comes from. That's where prejudice comes from. That's where racism comes from. You know, I have a boss who's black and I don't address those issues. And so I begin to resent him, and then I get bitter, and all of a sudden, I'm not mad at my boss. I'm mad at all black men because all black men are the same way. That's what happens when you take anger and you don't address it. It's got to be addressed. You cannot repress it and leave it there. Look at what's happening in America right now. Why is there all the racism? Why is there all the violence? Why is there all the hatred? Why is there all the bitterness? I'll tell you exactly why. Because suddenly in the last few years, we're not allowed to have national dialogues anymore. We're not allowed to talk about the way we disagree with each other anymore. And if you disagree with me, I hate you. And if I disagree with you, you hate me. And we can't talk, and so there's just this anger that's built up, and there's no place to talk about it and get it out and address it. So it grows and it grows and it grows, and now what? We have these mass shootings, and we have these riots, and we have all this racism, and Republicans and Democrats can't get in the same room and talk anymore, and they hate each other, and they treat each other with disrespect. It's awful, but it all comes back down to this anger issue. They're repressing the anger instead of addressing it and dealing with it and talking with people and learning how to compromise. They're holding it in, getting resentful, getting bitter, and then just becoming racist and ugly and mean, even down to the point of shooting other people. At the time of the filming of this video, we just had a shooting a couple of weeks ago in Nashville where a transgender walked into a Christian school and shot and killed 6 people because that person was upset and mad, bitter over the way they were treated at that school many years before, but they had never addressed the anger. It repressed and repressed and repressed till they finally took out a gun and killed 6 people because of that anger. That's why repression is terrible, terrible way to handle anger. You cannot repress it because it causes all sorts of relational damage and societal damage. And to be honest with you, we could see it take out our country. We could just see it take us down because we can't dialogue anymore. We can't talk about our anger anymore. We have to repress it and then blow it up. So really, really tragic. So that's number one. The second one is express it. I have several proverbs here I want to read when it comes to expressing anger. What I mean by expressing anger is giving full vent to our anger. Proverbs 19:19 says, "A hot-tempered man must pay the penalty. If you rescue him, you will have to do it again." And then Proverbs 22, verses 24 and 25 says this, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared. Isn't that interesting that the Proverbs tells us that? Anger is actually, it's not only addictive, but you can catch it from somebody else. It's contagious. You can catch it like a disease. And he says, you know what you need to do? Don't make friends with a hot-tempered person. Don't allow someone to give full vent to their anger. Proverbs 29:11 says a fool gives full vent to his anger. Just stay away from those people because it's contagious. And you think about it, when you're around somebody who gives full vent to their anger, what's your response? It's anger back, right? Because when they come at you screaming, what's your natural response? Scream back. And so it can be contagious. So this full vent to the anger, it is also a terrible way to handle anger. Many years ago, back in the early 2000s, if I remember correctly, for a while the psychological community decided that this was the way to handle anger, is you give full vent to it. And so they would set up punching bags in counseling offices, and you'd go in there and you'd talk about your mother and all the problems that you had because of her, and then they'd, write a name on a piece of tape and they'd tape it on the punching bag, and they'd say, okay, give it to your mother. Boy, just get all this anger out. And you know what they found really quick? It is a terrible way to handle your anger, because anger is not only contagious that we talked about a minute ago, but it is addictive and it is progressive. And so, boy, that release that you get, that psychological release and all those endorphins that you release, boy, it feels really good. It's like a high on drugs. And so guess what you want to do? You want to do it again. And so the more angry you get and have that violence, boy, you want to do violence again. But it's not just violence again. It's addictive violence, and it's progressive violence. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with women who've been abused by men. And I've talked to them and said, talk to me about what happened. How did it get here? Well, he used to just scream at me. And then one time he pushed me, and then one time he choked me, and then one time he slapped me, and this time he broke my jaw. Progressive, addictive. It takes more violence next time to give me the same high as the violence did this time. And it was more this time than it was last time. That's why they realized in the counseling office, oh no, we can't do this. You give full vent, and what? It's contagious, and it's hurtful, and it's addictive, and it gets worse, and it progresses. Terrible, terrible, terrible way to handle anger. And so you can't give full vent to your anger. You have to learn to control your anger if you're going to have any relationships at all. In fact, these people who give full vent to anger, they don't have relationships. They have broken relationships after broken relationships. Nobody wants to be around them because it's dangerous. It's just dangerous to be around people that give full vent to their anger. And so very, very, very negative way to handle your anger. So you do not repress it. You do not express it or give full vent to it. So what do? Well, the Bible's very clear. Here's what you do with your anger. You address it. You just address the situation. You address the anger. And so I'm going to give you a couple of ideas real quick on how to address the anger so that you're going to get angry. You handle it in a godly way so that Satan doesn't give a foothold and you end up hurting a lot of people around you. Okay, so here's how you manage anger. Number one, you confess it. You need to be self-aware when your emotional temperature gets high, and you just need to confess, hey, I'm really struggling here. I'm beginning to get angry, and I need to address this issue. So let me just give you an example. I told you earlier about repressing anger. So I deny I'm angry, I repress it, and then I blow up on Allison, and we have this fight because I'm yelling and screaming. By the way, that doesn't happen, especially not anymore. I've never been much of a yeller, but it happens with a lot of couples. Okay, so if I do that with Allison, well, instead, what's the healthy way to do it? I'll tell you exactly, and this happens all the time. Allison is talking to me about something, I get frustrated, and I get angry, so instead of walking away or sliding it under the rug and repressing it or blowing up at her, I simply go, hey babe, I'm not liking where this conversation is going. I'm getting angry. I don't want to yell at you. I don't want to hurt you. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take a time out. Not for very long. Remember, it says don't let the sun go down on your anger. You got to address the issue. I'm going to go take a 5-minute walk around the block, or I'm going to go into my study for a minute, or you know what, I just want to walk away. I just want to calm down, and then we'll come back and have this discussion. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. You got to come back and address it, or you're doing what? Repressing it. It's going to be a blow up later. But just learn how to do that. Learn your temperature when it's rising and catch it before it gets too high and you explode or you repress, and just confess it. I'm angry. I need to go address it on my own. I'm going to calm down, then we'll come back and finish this conversation. Sometimes, if it's a pretty heated conversation, you might have to go away and do that 5 or 6 times. And when you decide to change the way you're communicating, especially in marriage, to where you don't have the repression and then every 6 months have the blow up, you'll feel like for a while you're having these little spats all the time. But reality is you're just learning how to communicate differences, and after a while, you don't have to communicate that many differences because you're addressing them and dealing with them the whole way. And so it actually leads to a whole lot more peace in the home than stuffing and stuffing and stuffing and then exploding. That's such an unhealthy cycle to get involved with. So number 1 is confess your anger. Number 2, confirm the source of your anger. Now listen, this is gold. This is the most important thing I'm going to say. You got to listen to this, because this is the key to handling your anger. Find the source of your anger. Anger is a secondary emotion. Why are you mad? An unmet expectation, right? So what's the unmet expectation? Get to the bottom of it. Why are you angry? If you figure out why you're angry and address the source of the anger, guess what happens to the anger? It goes away. So there's basically 3 sources of anger that you need to remember. I want you to memorize this, okay? Hurt, frustration, and fear. Hurt, frustration, and fear. I'm angry. So immediately, here's what I go to. I'm either hurt, frustrated, or fearful about something. So I'm hurt. What am I hurt about? Who hurt me? Why did they hurt me? If it's hurt, then I need to go to that person. I need to work it out. When it gets worked out, what happens? The anger goes away. I'm frustrated. Well, what's frustrated me? What has happened? What unmet expectation is out there to where I'm frustrated? What am I frustrated with? When I find it, I deal with that frustration, I address it, anger goes away. The third one's a little harder. Fear. What am I afraid of? That's a little bit more of a subconscious issue and a heart issue for us that's a little harder to identify. The other 2 are a little easier because they're more external. But we all have fear of abandonment. We all have fear of failure. So those 2 big ones, right? Abandonment and failure. And then we always have this fear of losing control. And control freaks, it's usually a fear of losing control that's causing their anger. So you need to ask yourself the question, am I fearful of losing control? Am I fearful of being abandoned? Am I fearful of failing? What's causing my anger? If you can identify hurt, frustration, or fear, address it, then the anger goes away. And so it's really important that you confess the anger early on before you blow up and hurt someone. Then you backtrack and say, okay, what's causing this anger? Find the source, address it, and move on. And that's how you handle that anger, through getting to the core of it with hurt, frustration, and fear. Number 3, just control your temper. You know, Proverbs 16:32 and 29:22 both talk about you have to control your temper. If you can't control your temper, you just hurt people all around you. And then Proverbs 15:1, I really like Proverbs 15:1. I'm gonna turn over there and read it. It says, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. You have to consider the consequences. What's the consequences of me blowing up here? What's the consequences? When I get in the heat of the moment and I've already lost my temper, my mind kind of shuts off and I don't consider the consequences, right? But if I can early on address the anger, if I can early on try to find the source, walk and work hard in controlling my temper, and then think about the consequences, that gentle answer, then I won't stir up the anger, right? I always would tell my staff this leadership principle. Anytime you're walking into conflict, there's a fire, right? And you're walking in as a leader with 2 buckets in your hand. You got a bucket of gasoline and a bucket of water. And you get to choose which bucket you put on that fire. You can pour that gasoline on and you can have an explosion. And boy, haven't you seen leaders do that? They'll just walk in and the temperature is high and they just aggravate the situation. They instigate the situation and blow it up and make it even hotter. But you also have water. And that gentle answer, just calming things down, calming people down, pouring that water on the fire, you can put the fire out. But it's all about what? Tone, carefully selected words, not talking too fast, not talking too loud, not using inflammatory verbiage, just watching what you say, making sure you're controlling what you say. Stop and consider the consequences. Stop and control that anger. Stop and control that response. And you can begin to mitigate other people's anger and come in and calm down the situation around you. So addressing the anger, that is the key to how to control your anger. Now there's one final thought and then we'll be done with this video, and that is forgiveness. If anger is a poison, then forgiveness is the antidote to that poison. And it's so interesting because anger is a poison. It will absolutely destroy your soul. But forgiveness, it just wipes it out, right? It's like calling poison control. Because here's what happens. If anger is about you owe me, then that means one of 2 things. I either need to get what you owe me from you, or I need to forgive the debt. And so if I forgive the debt's paid in full, then I no longer have to be angry at you. And look, forgiveness is not me saying what you did isn't wrong or that I'm not hurt. Forgiveness is simply just turning you over to the Lord for the Lord to handle it so I don't have to. Now, this is not a video on forgiveness. That's a whole different video. It's coming up. It'll be coming up in a few weeks. But I'm just telling you, the antidote to anger is forgiveness. It is the best tool we have in our toolbox given us by the Lord to be able to handle anger and handle it in an appropriate way. So I'm going to leave that with you. We'll talk about forgiveness later on. But I just want you to think through the next time you get angry. Don't repress. Don't release it. Don't express it. Don't give full vent to it. What? Confess it. Address it. Confess that anger before it gets too hot. Get to the core issue. Consider the consequences. Choose your words wisely. Choose your tone wisely. And watch the anger subside and the situation go without any sort of relational hurt and pain that you have to fix. Here's reality is, anger gives Satan a foothold because it can destroy relationships. Anger hurts friendships. Anger hurts all relationships. It destroys the people you love. It can lead to a divorce. It can lead to a loss of relationship between parents and children. So you've got to learn to control anger God's way. So let's pray. Lord, thank you for all your wisdom that you give us on anger. And Lord, I just pray that we will learn how to address our anger in a godly fashion. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, thank you for watching the video today. God bless you. Hope you have a great day.